Second level spells are the first jump in spell power that any magic user will get to experience in the game. I feel like this level in particular has a lot of expectation for a player, particularly a new one, since it's an exciting moment in their character's development. They've played a few sessions, they've leveled up a couple of times, and they finally get access to a whole new tier of magic. And while there certainly are a few absolute bangers across all of the second level spells in the game, there's also a few that really miss the mark during the design phase, and those are the ones that I want to talk about today. This is the third video in my poorly designed spells series, so check out the others if you haven't already. But in case you haven't seen them though, it's important to establish what exactly I'm talking about when I say that these spells are poorly designed. Firstly, very good spells are not necessarily poorly designed. Similarly, bad spells aren't necessarily poorly designed either. Niche spells that are rarely picked but do serve a function and serve it well are also not necessarily poorly designed, though any of these three categories can still be. The spells that I'm looking at fall into three main categories. Trap spells, ones that appear like they have some value or are good, but in reality they just aren't. Extreme outliers, spells that are just so disproportionately good or bad that their existence is problematic for the game in general. And finally, what I call answer spells. Think Goodberry, spells that effectively remove an entire challenge or pillar from a campaign just by virtue of its very existence. We're going to be looking at a wide variety of spells in this video, spanning all three categories. I will say though that on the whole, second level spells do seem to be generally much more poorly designed than first level spells. When it came to those first level spells, I found myself looking for ones to add, but here I had the exact opposite problem. I found myself trying to cut down the list to prevent this video from being like an hour long. I spent some time trying to figure out exactly why this is, and I think it largely comes down to the fact that second level spells exist in something of an awkward spot. First level spells had to be distinctly better than cantrips, but not too good so they aren't crowding out future options, and third level spells represent the first major power jump for spellcasters. So as a result, I think the design team threw a lot of experimental ideas into the second level group, which results in many of them feeling weird. Anyway, that's enough context. Let's take a look at the first spell on our list, Crown of Madness. But first, if you enjoy what I do and want to help support me, a sub to the channel would be incredible. You can also become a member for as little as $1 per month and get some fun rewards like shoutouts, you can help decide the next video, you can get your homebrew reviewed, and even priority replies to comments. So thank you so much. Crown of Madness is available to bards, sorcerers, wizards, warlocks, and oathbreaker paladins. It costs 1 action to cast, has a range of 120 feet, targets a wisdom saving throw, and requires concentration for up to 1 minute. The text reads, one humanoid of your choice that you can see within range must succeed on a wisdom saving throw or become charmed by you for the duration. While the target is charmed in this way, a twisted crown of jagged iron appears on its head, and a madness glows in its eyes. The charmed target must use its action before moving on each of its turns to make a melee attack against a creature other than itself that you mentally choose. The target can act normally on its turn if you choose no creature or if none are within its reach. On your subsequent turns, you must use your action to maintain control over the target or the spell ends. Also, the target can make a wisdom saving throw at the end of each of its turns. On success, the spell ends. So there's trap spells and then there's Crown of Madness. I'm honestly not sure what the design team was thinking with this one. I have to assume that it was among one of the first spells designed for the game, as it has elements of that super concentration that we discussed in Witchbolt, but we'll get to that. Firstly, this thing only targets humanoids, so a plethora of potential targets are immediately nixed. Even better though, there's a lot of creatures that fall under the category of humanoids such as elves and drow that due to their Fey ancestry feature have advantage on saves against the charmed condition. So even among the valid targets, a lot of them will still be rolling at advantage without having to do anything. It also targets maybe the most reliable save in the game, aside from dexterity, and then makes it incredibly obvious that the creature is under some form of magical effect, given that a literal jagged iron crown appears above its head and madness glows in its eyes. And we still haven't got to the worst part yet. The only real effect here is that it allows the caster to force the target to use their action to make a melee attack against a creature, but it has to do that before it moves. So if there's nothing next to it, the creature can just do whatever it wants, including telling its allies to just never stand near it. So even when it works, it's mostly useless, and we still haven't got to the worst part. That has to go to maintaining this thing. Crown of Madness requires concentration, but worse than that, you have to spend your action on your turn maintaining this spell too. I mentioned this in my discussion of Witch Bolt during my first level spells video, so here it is again. This quote-unquote super concentration. You can't cast any other spells, you can't make action attacks, you can't dash, dodge, nothing. You're just sitting there hoping that this abomination lands and that someone is dumb enough to stand next to the dude with glowing eyes and a magical jagged iron crown. Oh, and they can also just repeat the wisdom saving throw at the end of every single turn. Okay, deep breaths. Let's move on to something a little bit lighter. Hey, come check out my Discord. I've left a link in the description. It's probably been some of the most fun I've had discussing D&D in a long time. Next is Find Traps. This spell just doesn't actually, find traps. It's available to clerics, druids, and rangers. It costs 1 action to cast, has a range of 120 feet, and takes effect immediately. The text reads, "You sense the presence of any trap within range that is within line of sight. A trap for the purposes of this spell includes anything that would inflict a sudden or unexpected effect that you consider to be harmful or undesirable, which was specifically intended as such by its creator." Thus, the spell would sense an area affected by the alarm spell, a glyph of warding, or a mechanical pit trap, but it would not reveal a natural weakness in the floor, an unstable ceiling, or a hidden sinkhole. This spell merely reveals that a trap is present. You don't learn the location of each trap, but you do learn the general nature of the danger posed by a trap that you sense. So everything is all good here until we get to the last sentence. This spell merely reveals that a trap is present. You don't learn the location of each trap. I feel like just about any adventurer would be able to use their intuition to determine if a particular area that they're delving into is probably trapped. They don't need to burn this spell slot. Here's the thing about this spell though, because I think it's actually a little bit more complicated and nuanced than it seems. If it just revealed any trap and its exact location and the nature of it, etc., that might actually be a little bit too powerful. Similarly though, learning that an area is under the effect of an alarm or glyph of warding spell isn't entirely useless either, even if you don't exactly know where things are coming from. Either the design team should just fundamentally change how the spell works, or probably just change the name to something like Detect Traps to more accurately indicate what it does. Next up is Continual Flame, a spell that I'm not entirely sure why it exists, other than for every single adventure module to constantly remind us that the sconces on the walls are lit by a Continual Flame spell. Anyway, it's available to clerics, wizards, and artificers. It costs 1 action to cast, has a range of touch, lasts until dispelled, and requires 50 gold pieces worth of ruby dust, which the spell consumes. The text reads, "A flame equivalent in brightness to a torch springs forth from an object that you touch. The effect looks like a regular flame, but it creates no heat and doesn't use oxygen. A continual flame can be covered or hidden, but not smothered or quenched." So yeah, this is a spell that entirely exists more or less for flavor purposes, which, as I mentioned, isn't necessarily a bad thing, but this one is. The higher you get in spell level, the harder it is to get away with flavor spells, and this one, I think at least, pushes it just a little bit too far. Continual Flame is basically just the light spell, which is a cantrip, but it lasts forever. It provides the same amount of light, but interestingly, it provides no heat, so it can't even be used in a campfire setting, not that light provides heat either though. The thing is though, the material component for this is just so unreasonably expensive. It requires 50 gold pieces worth of ruby dust that the spell also consumes. So even if you did want to use this to light all the torches in your keep, it's probably cheaper to just hire some local apprentice mage to just walk around and cast light all day long. And hey, you're creating jobs, so good on you. Next might be a little bit more of a controversial one, Heat Metal. Heat Metal is available to bards, druids, artificers, and forge domain clerics. It costs 1 action to cast, has a range of 60 feet, and requires concentration for up to 1 minute. The text reads, "Choose a manufactured metal object, such as a metal weapon or a suit of heavy or medium armor that you can see within range. You cause the object to glow red hot. Any creature in physical contact with the object takes 2d8 fire damage when you cast the spell. Until the spell ends, you can use a bonus action on each of your subsequent turns to cause this damage again. If a creature is holding or wearing the object and it takes the damage from it, the creature must succeed on a Constitution saving throw or drop the object if it can. If it doesn't drop the object, it has disadvantage on attack rolls and ability checks until the start of your next turn." I think this spell is deceptively good. If you're fighting any creature in the game that's wearing metal armor, and there are a lot, this spell is really good. For a second level spell slot, you get to cause damage every single turn, provided you maintain concentration, and also cause disadvantage on any attack rolls and ability checks that the creature would make without having to make an attack roll yourself or force a saving throw. That's really powerful. The reason I mention armor is just that if the creature is wearing some kind of metal armor and you target it, they can't simply drop it like they would a sword. which means that you can just chain this effect as long as you can maintain concentration. And unlike spells like Witch Bolt or Crown of Madness, you don't need to take any additional steps to keep the spell going. It's just regular concentration. And you get the option to have the creature suffer the damage on a bonus action, but not doing so does not end the spell. The con save that's baked into Heat Metal is also really awkwardly worded and is mostly useless anyway. I get why there isn't really a save since you're targeting metal and not the creature. Same deal for the attack roll. If you're just targeting something not being worn, now suddenly everything would need to have an AC, so that can kinda get obnoxious. I feel like it should just have the caveat that if the item is being held or worn, you need to make an attack roll against the creature holding it, as they would naturally try and dodge the attack anyway. Next is Pass Without Trace. I've spoken about this in previous videos, so I'll be brief. Simply, the +10 bonus is just too high. This spell falls into the category of largely being what I call an answer spell. Granting a +10 on stealth checks to your entire party for up to an hour of concentration is really powerful. So powerful that this spell is almost a meme. If you've got someone in your group who can take Pass Without Trace, they will take Pass Without Trace. And sure, it's technically not necessarily an answer every single time since it does still rely on a roll. It's just so good though that it leads the DM to probably increasing the DCs on checks, which effectively ruins it anyway. The bonus should just be +5 or lower and then scale with spell level or something to that effect. Next is probably another contentious one, but for a very different reason. Tashas Mind Whip. I know a lot of people love this spell, including me, but it is just so disproportionately good. This spell is available to sorcerers and wizards. It costs 1 action to cast and has a range of 90 feet. The text reads, you psychically lash out at one creature that you can see within range. The target must make an intelligence saving throw. On a failed save, the target takes 3d6 psychic damage and it can't take a reaction until the end of its next turn. Moreover, on its next turn, it must choose whether it gets a move, an action, or a bonus action. It gets only one of the three. On a successful save, the target takes half as much damage and suffers none of the spell's other effects. The reason Tashas Mind Whip is so potent is because it directly impacts probably the most valuable thing in the game, action economy. You get much the same benefit as the slow spell, which is also probably too powerful for its level, and you get some damage on top of that, which is just kind of a nice bonus. And it also targets intelligence, probably the most unreliable save from the target's perspective in the game. Losing your reaction and having to choose between movement, an action, or a bonus action, and taking psychic damage, also very rarely resisted, is just so detrimental to the target. Not to mention that upcasting this spell increases the amount of potential targets. It's really good. Just imagine if you've got 2 players in your party taking turns casting this, or worse yet, just imagine a pair of enemy casters using this against your party. It's absolutely savage, and all for the low cost of a single 2nd level spell slot. From the incredibly powerful to the incredibly awful, the next spell that I want to discuss is Dust Devil. It's available to druids, sorcerers, and wizards. It costs 1 action to cast, has a range of 60 feet, in which it creates a 5-foot cube and requires concentration for up to a minute. I'm not even going to read the spell text because honestly, it's not worth it. The Cole's notes are that if you end your turn within 5 feet of this thing, you need to make a strength saving throw or take 1d8 bludgeoning damage, save for half, and be blown away 10 feet. Take that in, you need to end your turn there, so even push shenanigans aren't really useful with this one. Also, 1d8 bludgeoning damage, saving for half? This is worse than cantrip levels of damage, and those are at least reliable. Who's ending their turn next to this thing? I do want to give credit for it targeting a strength save. I wish more spells targeted saves other than dexterity and wisdom like 80% of the time, but that's about the best thing that it's got going for it. Alright, back to the insanely powerful Web. If you're a new player, I think it's really easy to overlook a lot of spells, especially ones that don't deal flashy amounts of damage, but I assure you that Web is just way too powerful of an effect for its level. It's available to sorcerers, wizards, Circle of the Land, Underdark druids, and artificers. It costs 1 action to cast, it has a range of 60 feet, and creates a 20-foot cube and requires concentration for up to 1 hour. This spell can effectively shut down an encounter, depending on the environment that you're in, but even if it's not hitting everyone, it's probably still worth it. The spell reads, you conjure a mass of thick, sticky webbing at a point of your choice within range. The web fills a 20-foot cube from that point for the duration. The webs are difficult terrain and lightly obscure the area. If the webs aren't anchored between 2 solid masses, such as a wall or trees, or layered across a floor or wall or ceiling, the conjured web collapses on itself and the spell ends at the start of your next turn. Webs layered over a flat surface have a depth of 5 feet. Each creature that starts its turn in the webs or that enters them during its turn must make a dexterity saving throw. On a failed save, the creature is restrained as long as it remains in the webs or until it breaks free. A creature restrained by the webs can use its action to make a strength check against your spell save DC. If it succeeds, it's no longer restrained. The webs are flammable. Any 5-foot cube of webs exposed to fire burns away in 1 round, dealing 2d4 fire damage to any creature that starts its turn in the fire. Putting enemies in the middle of this is borderline debilitating. It imposes the restrain condition on them, which sets their move speed to 0, makes attacks against the creatures have advantage, and their attacks have disadvantage, and they have disadvantage on dexterity saving throws. So now the creature needs to decide if they're going to spend their entire action attempting to break free, but remember that doing that requires a strength check, not a strength saving throw. So as a result, it's impossible for any creature to add their proficiency bonus to the check to this roll, making it even more effective. But even if they do manage to break out, the entire area around them is still difficult terrain. The craziest thing is that you can even still use this against flying targets to bring them down, as even though the spell description states that it ends if there's nothing to support the web, it ends at the start of your next turn. So again, either that creature has to waste their action attempting to break free, or then they just fall to the ground. Shutting down the battlefield for a low-level spell is just too potent. This spell would probably be used even if it were 5th level. The last spell that I want to talk about is Enthrall. Again, another spell I completely forgot existed until I began researching this video, and oh my god, I wish I could forget it again. It's available to bards and warlocks, it costs 1 action to cast, has a range of 60 feet, and lasts for 1 minute. I want to call this a trap, but I hesitate to even call it that. A trap has bait. This thing though, I don't even know. The text reads, you weave a distracting string of words causing creatures of your choice that you can see within range and that can hear you to make a wisdom saving throw. Any creature that can't be charmed succeeds on the saving throw automatically, and if your companions are fighting a creature, it has advantage on the save. On a failed save, the target has disadvantage on wisdom perception checks made to perceive any creature other than you until the spell ends, or until the target can no longer hear you. The spell ends if you're incapacitated or can no longer speak. The only potential thing that this spell has going for it is that you can make it target multiple creatures, but that is just so unreliable since you don't know if it actually worked or not. You may as well just not cast it at all. It's Schrodinger's crappy spell. I was trying to figure out exactly how to word why this spell is so bad, and I came across this thread on Reddit discussing it from 5 years ago with a response by the user BrainPower4, and it was spot on. I'm just gonna read it verbatim. For Enthrall to be useful, you need 1. To care that a creature is not noticed. 2. To not care that the bard or the warlock are noticed. 3. Be in a situation where the thing that you want to avoid being seen could reasonably be hidden, but doesn't already impose disadvantage on perception checks. Enthrall doesn't actually allow you to hide anywhere that you couldn't normally hide. 4. Not care that the targets of the spell need to be clearly seen and hear you casting magic in the area. 5. Not want to cause more of an obvious scene than spells like Fog Cloud or Darkness. 6. Care about hiding multiple things since you could just cast invisibility if you're only trying to hide 1 or 2 things. 7. Only care about the group of targets within 60 feet of yourself. 8. Believe that all targets will all fail your save DC. You don't actually have any indication of failure or success. Even if one passes its save or can't be charmed, it can simply point out whatever you're trying to hide to the rest of the group. Even when the stars perfectly align, it is still objectively worse than Pass Without Trace. The irony is that the only thing going for the spell, the fact that it can target multiple creatures, is also kind of its undoing. With each additional creature you target, you increase the likelihood that at least one of them is probably going to succeed on the save and just ruin the whole thing. This spell needs to either be completely revisited or just removed from the game. As you can probably tell, as far as design goes, 2nd level spells leave quite a bit to be desired. I'm really hoping that we see some big adjustments once the 2024 rulebooks are released later this year. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing and becoming a member, join my Discord, the link is in the description below, but otherwise, take care.